White words on a black background. The following film was written entirely by AI. The instruction to ChatGPT 4.0 was, write a plot for a film where a screenwriter realizes he is less good than artificial intelligence. This was our first prompt and only creative input as screenwriters. Based on that plot, we asked ChatGPT to generate characters and a step-by-step outline and to write these scenes one by one. Not a single word was changed or rearranged. The only thing we were allowed to do was shorten. For more information, visit www.lastscreenwriter.com. A projector flickers to life, casting movies onto a screen. Spotlight Media Productions presents. A movie projector stands alone in a small theater, projecting a montage of classic films on the wall. Nicholas Popel. A dimly lit office lined with bookcases. Gold trophies rest on a wooden shelf. Bonnie Milnes. A variety of classic films are displayed on the wall. Anna Arthur. A portly gray-haired man thumbs through reams of screenplays on a cluttered desk. Phil Cardwell. Teddy Holton Francis. In a modern living room, a blonde woman and boy sit closely on a couch as she reads to him. Christian Vaccaro. Marek Antuszewski. In black capital letters on a white page, a typewriter strikes the words, fade out. The screen fades to black, then the title appears, The Last Screenwriter. A woman stands next to a podium on a stage wearing a flowing yellow dress. She opens a bright yellow envelope and removes a slip of paper. Jack smiles as the blonde woman next to him kisses his cheek. Rising from his seat, he turns and nods to the audience before making his way to the stage, where a row of lights flash down on the stage curtain. Beaming, Jack accepts his award, then steps up to the mic. He raises the trophy above his head and waves as he exits the stage. On a wide staircase, Jack and the blonde woman descend arm in arm. Cameras flash from all directions. In an upscale restaurant, Jack sits with the blonde woman, another couple, and a man with a white beard. At a desk in a dimly lit office. A view of a round glass villa surrounded by evergreens draped in snow. Inside, Jack descends a spiral staircase and joins the boy on the couch. Jack's wife walks toward the door. Alex snatches his backpack and scurries off. Sitting cross-legged on the couch, Jack writes in a notebook. In the evening, a cocktail party in Jack's living room. Dressed in formal wear, people mingle. Jack stands amidst some guests. His wife and Alex look on. From the upper level, his wife frowns as she watches Jack strut about the crowd, flaunting his trophy. The man with the white beard approaches him. Richard ushers him outside. Jack slightly nods as he turns to the door. With a serious expression, Richard looks on. Daytime. Jack types at his desk. He answers his phone. He grins as he puts down his phone. At Jack's desk, Paul taps the device, which lights up. A worried look crosses Jack's face. The transcript appears on Jack's laptop. Jack stares blankly ahead. At night, Jack sits quietly on the bed as Sarah combs her hair. She walks over to him. Daytime. Jack sits at his desk and addresses the AI device. Jack smirks. With a broad smile, he moves closer to the desk. Nighttime. Jack sits in his dimly lit office in front of his computer. From the second level. She leaves. Jack turns to the device. He grins. His grin turns to a frown as the AI device takes over the laptop. He sits back and watches as words and paragraphs fill the screen. Later, in Richard's study, Richard hands Jack a glass of whiskey and sits across from him. Jack nods approvingly, then raises his glass for a toast. Later, Jack sits at his laptop, the AI device next to it. A blue light glows as it speaks. Irritated, Jack shrugs, then turns back to his computer. with a look of defeat. At night, an aerial view of Jack at his desk. The AI device glows blue. With a displeased look, she proceeds up the stairs. The device shuts off when he closes the laptop. Looking perplexed, Jack backs away from the desk, eyes fixed on the device. With a stoic look, Sarah sits in a common area at the top of the stairs. She looks at him earnestly. With a frightened look, solemnly, he stares blankly past her. With a look of shock and anger. As she leaves, Jack bows his head and closes his eyes. Daytime. Jack sits alone in the living room, staring pensively at a picture of him and Sarah smiling, her head resting on his shoulder. Slumped in his chair, he frowns. Jack gets up. Standing at a tall window, Jack stares blankly outside. Elsewhere, at the theater, Jack stands alone in the lobby with a drink in his hand. A woman spots him. With the manuscript in hand, she bears a look of excitement as she walks away. On the second level, in the backstage area, Jack comes across a man and a woman. They share an imaginary toast. Jack appears uneasy. Now at home, Jack sits at his desk, his skin pale and eyes bloodshot. Sarah descends the stairway and passes behind him. Sarah peers into Jack's office with a curious look. Looking skeptical, she exits the house. He places his mug on the desk. He appears annoyed. With furrowed eyebrows, he looks toward the device. Later at a coffee shop, Jack sits at a table, appearing lost in thought. Mark sits across from him. Jack sits still as he considers Mark's perspective. Mark raises his glass. They toast, later in Paul's office. Jack shakes his head, then turns to Paul. At night, Jack sits at his desk, his chin resting on his fists. On the desk, his phone lights up. He picks it up to find a text from Paul that reads, "Looking forward to that blockbuster. Remember, AI only." In the living room, Sarah files her nails and quietly observes him. Jack steps to a wall of bookshelves. He removes a few, then tosses one to the floor. He retrieves another small pile, sits on the floor, and thumbs through a handwritten script. Sarah answers the door to discover Mark holding a bottle of whiskey. She welcomes him in. Mark sits in Jack's chair. Now standing, Jack appears exasperated. Mark gets up and leaves. Worriedly, Jack turns to Sarah. Sarah slowly exits the room. Mark and Sarah sit at a small glass table. Mark sips a glass of whiskey. Jack proceeds to his desk and pulls up his chair. Mark and Sarah follow him. Mark gulps down the rest of his drink. Mark saunters away, while Jack fixates on the computer. Sinking back in his chair, Jack appears distraught. Daytime. Jack sits at his desk looking tired and disheveled. He stares blankly at the screen. He sits back, arms crossed, and watches as text fills the screen. He looks terrified. Eyes wide, he witnesses words flash by. The final line reads, "Fade out." The title page appears, "Eclipse of the Machine," written by Jack. At a party, a large banner reads, "Congratulations, Jack, box office hit." Sarah half-heartedly raises her glass. They share an awkward hug. Jack nervously chuckles. Sarah stares at him with a look of distaste. Alone upstairs, Jack finishes his drink. He leans against the table and looks down at his phone. Numerous congratulatory messages fill his inbox. Sarah appears next to him and gently touches his back. Leaning in, she rests her arm on his shoulder. They share an emotionally charged look. Daytime. Jack sits at his desk with a vacant stare. He rubs his temples. He picks up an old notebook and pen, then leaves. In the living room, Jack sits paralyzed. Sarah sits behind him near the windows. Alex enters holding a colorful notebook. Alex looks disappointed. Alex sits on Sarah's lap. She puts her arms around him and holds the book before him as she reads. Jack sits motionless, his pen hovering over the notebook. At night, in Alex's room, as Alex cuddles into his blanket, Jack pauses with a look of despair. He rises, steps toward the door, and switches the light off as he leaves. Morning, Jack wanders aimlessly around the house. Images of him lying on the stairs, spinning in his office chair, and leaning on the desk rubbing his temples. His face is colorless. From the staircase, Sarah pauses, then continues upstairs, slamming doors behind her. He steps outside and stands frozen with a dazed expression. At night, Jack's eyes are affixed to a blank computer screen. Sarah enters and sits next to him. His eyes are glued on the screen. He turns away. Jack avoids her gaze. With a devastated look, she gradually rises from her chair and leaves. He stares fixedly at the blank screen. A cursor pulses in the middle of it. From above, Jack is seen hunched over his computer, arms folded on the desk. Sarah enters. He stands and turns toward the living room. In the living room, Alex sits on the couch, while Sarah gazes thoughtfully out a window. Jack enters. She turns to Jack. They stand facing each other, nearly 10 feet in between them. Sarah and Alex return from upstairs. Sarah carries a large suitcase. They pass Jack on their way out. With a melancholy look, Alex shuts the door behind him. In Paul's office, In a hospital, Jack walks down a brightly lit corridor, glancing at doors as he passes. A woman wearing a white lab coat exits a private room and addresses Jack with a grave look on her face. With furrowed eyebrows and shoulders slumped, Jack shuffles into Richard's dimly lit room. Jack caresses Richard's lifeless hand, then gazes upward. Later, Jack stands in his dark office. He paces across the room. Daytime. Jack lays face down on the couch. The floor is littered with paper. Mark knocks on the window carrying a six-pack of beer. Jack stirs. In the living room, Jack sits across from Mark. Mark opens a beer and hands one to Jack. Jack takes a swig. Jack looks quizzically at Mark. Later, Jack lies face up on the office floor looking wary. Jack kneels, peering across the desk to the device. Jack appears to be processing the device's sentiment. Jack slowly steps away from the desk and retrieves a baseball bat propped up against a bookcase. Jack swings down on the device. With a look of rage, he strikes it again. Shattered pieces fly across the room. Appearing exhausted, he peers down at the debris, then plops down on a chair. Outside, the sun peeks through the trees onto Jack's villa. Inside, Jack rummages through a cluttered cellar. Tucked amongst discarded items, he discovers a small rectangular metal box. As he opens the box, his face lights up and he beams. Now upstairs, Jack places his old typewriter on his desk. With eyes locked on the typewriter, Jack pulls up his chair. He retrieves a piece of paper from a drawer and feeds it into the typewriter. He rubs his hands together as if to warm them up, then begins typing. He removes the sheet of paper and examines it. He crumples the paper and tosses it into a wastebasket. It lands next to broken fragments of the device. He loads a new sheet of paper and starts over. He hurls the paper into the trash and tries again. He reviews the third sheet, nods approvingly, and sets it aside. Images of Jack working through the night scroll past. Outside, a thunderstorm rolls in. Flashes of lightning briefly illuminate the office. Daytime, Jack plods alongside a brick building and makes his way to the door, then hesitates before ringing the doorbell. Sarah opens the door. Jack holds a stack of paper under his arm. Reluctantly, Sarah lets him in. With a somber look on her face, Sarah makes her way to a chair. With a wide smile, Alex watches as Jack sits and places the stack of paper on a coffee table. Sarah picks up the manuscript and skims through the first few pages. Alex comes to her side and eagerly looks on. Her eyes soften. She grins. Misty-eyed, Jack draws Sarah and Alex into his arms and sobs. Jack strides into Paul's office. Radiant, he presents Paul with a thick brown envelope. Jack nods, then turns to leave. Jack beams. With a contemplative look, Paul removes the manuscript from the envelope and begins thumbing through the pages. Images of Jack's family cheerfully lounging in the living room. Contently, Jack smirks at us. Cut to black. Audio description written by Jackie Boire and Kyle Warwick-Mathieu. Voiced by Kyle Warwick-Mathieu. Credits appear. Written by ChatGPT 4.0. Directed by Peter Louisi. Produced by David Louisi and Peter Louisi. Director of Photography, Raphael Kissler. Music, Martin Villager. Set Designer, Jasper Birchinger. Sound, Martin Edwards. Makeup, Maritza Mediva. Cast credits. Jack, Nicholas Popel. Sarah, Bonnie Milnes. AI System, Anna Arthur. Paul Davidson, Phil Cardwell. Alex, Teddy Holton Francis. Mark, Christian Vaccaro. Richard, Marek Antuszewski. Rachel, film critic, Dominique Lubin. Adam, actor, Michael Morris. Doctor, Natasha Zabot. Announcer, Elizabeth Troy. A big thank you to all of our wonderful extras. Credits continue. Copyright Spotlight Media Productions AG.